Hi, I'm Ken Stiles, and I'm the author of The Domestic Sources of International Institutions, published by Routledge last year. And I'm recording this video because some recent events have prompted me to wonder whether those insights from that book might help us to better understand international institutions today and in the near future. So the point of the book is to explain why international institutions have changed so much over the course of human history. And my argument is that this stems primarily from changes in the dominant actors at any given point in time, whether they're empires or kingdoms or republics, that those dominant actors can shape and have an incentive to shape the rules that the rest of the world follows. So where do those rules come from? Well, I argue that it mostly comes from the domestic institutions of these major powers. These are things that the leaders of these countries are familiar with and comfortable with. They've worked well for them, and so they want to replicate what's going on at home abroad. And so an autocracy, which rules by fear, intimidation, bribery, deception, is going to organize the world along these lines. So you'll have a lot of conflict, conquest, injustice, and that sort of thing. An egalitarian society, on the other hand, rules by participation, fairness, law, dispute settlement, this sort of thing, and will project those ideas and institutions onto the international stage. Compare, for example, two extremes, which would be Nazi Germany governing Europe in the early 1940s, as opposed to the United States as the dominant actor after the Second World War, and you see what I'm getting at, right? If there are more than one major power, then you'll get interesting interactions. Autocracies, for example, are very good at deception, and democracies, egalitarian societies, can tend to be a little gullible, and so that's a bad match. On the other hand, a mature democracy can rally the world to protect human rights and fairness and justice and constrain the autocratic society in a lot of cases. We saw this during the Cold War, for example. So the question becomes, where are we now? I find it very important to get a sense of what U.S. domestic politics are in order to see whether that might shape international institutions. And I would argue that over the last 20, 25 years, there are signs that the U.S. is less of a mature democracy and increasingly what comparative politics people call an illiberal democracy. So if you recall way back at 9/11, that the U.S. government removed a lot of civil liberties in the name of national security. Now, some of those were restored, but not all. During the Gulf War in 2003, the Bush administration reintroduced torture, and that persisted for a while. So those two things indicate that under certain circumstances, even basic principles like not torturing people or protecting people's privacy or respecting habeas corpus can actually be set aside. More fundamentally, the Supreme Court has actually participated in changing some of our rules. In 2010, for example, the Citizens United decision allowed unlimited campaign contributions by individuals and corporations, which gave us the result of billionaires financing people's campaigns. The Elon Musks and Michael Bloombergs of America have an outsized influence that's reminiscent of the 1890s, the Gilded Age. In addition, we've seen the introduction of misinformation, disinformation, deception, in our political campaigns that have gone mostly unchecked. We've seen candidates get indicted and then get reelected, even convicted sometimes. The Supreme Court ruled that anything that a president does in office in the official capacity of the president cannot be prosecuted, that the president is immune, even though the actions might be illegal under other circumstances. You see voting rights under attack, intimidation of political opponents, and all of these things that I think together can lead us to the conclusion that America is becoming an illiberal democracy. And I think 4 more years of Donald Trump will probably accelerate that. Now, what are the implications for international institutions? Well, like I said, I think that the great powers, and now that would be the US, Russia, and China, have an outsized influence on shaping the world we live in. We know that Russia and China have disdain for human rights and even the territorial rights of their neighbors. Obviously, Russia also doesn't care about the rules of war and has been practicing horrific actions in Ukraine. China has been aggressive in the South China Sea and against some of its neighbors. China, on the other hand, is also playing the long game and is still active at the United Nations, contributing troops for peacekeeping operations and so forth, even building up international economic institutions. So China's policies are a little bit mixed. The United States, historically, like I said, has been a big sponsor of multilateral institutions, but we've seen less and less of that. The U.S. withdrew from the World Health Organization because they felt it was biased in favor of China. This was during the COVID crisis, mind you. The U.S. has stopped sending American troops into peacekeeping operations. Trump has made it clear that he is not particularly interested in protecting victims of genocide or refugees or asylum seekers, that he's inclined to allow regional disputes to just play out and let the strongest win. So on trade, the U.S. has been unilateral for many years now. Even the Biden administration adopted that approach, such that the World Trade Organization is no longer functioning. So what do we end up with? Well, I'm going to call this current system an illiberal international order. And I think there are parallels to illiberal democracy. We still have the same organizations, right? The United Nations is still there. The World Trade Organization is still around. And the rules are still on the books, so to speak. But you can sense, I think, over the last 10, 15 years, that they matter less and less, to the point that the Secretary General, Guterres, is spending a lot of his time asking the most powerful countries in the world to respect international law. Well, that's a bad sign, right? And I think that another Trump administration will accelerate this trend. So we'll still have the organizations, a scaffolding, but the building itself will be crumbling. Now, what are the implications of this? Well, there'll be more injustice, more violence, but I don't anticipate that there'll be a world war. I think that we'll end up with a sort of balance of power between the US, Russia, and China. So I guess that's good news in a sense. The US probably won't be sending troops overseas, which may also be good news. But there will probably be countries come and go and many, many casualties in these regional wars. But because the institutions haven't been entirely, and probably won't be entirely dismantled, that means they'll still be around in 5 or 10 or 15 years. And it's possible that things will change. We saw dramatic changes back in 1989, 1990, And so it's possible that the Putin government may collapse, that China's economy may collapse, and it might become more democratic as a result. And maybe the United States will return to mature democracy status, in which case I think everybody would return to these liberal international institutions and revitalize them. I think it's especially important that the Europeans, Canadians, and others stay true to international law and international institutions, because we may be depending on them to not only preserve but then to reinvigorate them. So those are the insights that I have that connect with the book, The Domestic Sources of International Institutions, and I hope you've enjoyed this, and I wish you the best. Bye-bye.